Oftentimes, it can be hard to embrace change because we believe it will affect the memories we have of our loved ones. What we fail to see is that this often keeps us stagnant. This is the story of a widow who is struggling to keep her husband's restaurant open. When she risks losing the business, she is forced to embrace change and might find love again. In the opening scene of Always Amore, we see the Il Cibo y Vida, where a birthday celebration is being held for Nana. The staff in the restaurant bring the 71st birthday cake to her as they celebrate her. Nana is excited and shares her appreciation with everyone. Nana appreciates Antonio for the pasta and is proud that her late son, Marco, taught him well. She changes the cake decoration from 71 to 17 before making her wish, meaning she wishes to get younger. Everyone laughs, and Elizabeth reminds her that she has always been young at heart. They celebrate, and Ginny, Elizabeth's friend, gives Nana the gift she brought for her. Elizabeth's late husband is Nana's son Marco. The Italian restaurant they run, which was once successful, is now struggling. Nana is happy she stayed because she believes her family is with her daughter-in-law and her granddaughter. Elizabeth shares the cake with everyone. Ginny tells Elizabeth that her pastry chef outdid herself because the cake is exceptional. Elizabeth reveals that she is the one who baked the cake herself because the pastry chef called in sick. This amazes everyone because the cake is sweeter than what the pastry chef usually makes. Elizabeth gives the excuse of not having time to bake more, even though everyone feels she should do more baking. Elizabeth loves baking, and she has been baking with her mom since she was young, but stopped when she moved in with Marco. Richard, the major shareholder of the restaurant, enters, and Elizabeth excitedly greets them while giving him a plate of cake. Richard collects it, but also tells Elizabeth he needs to speak to her privately. In another scene, Ben, a professional restaurant consultant, has just completed the job of making a restaurant popular, and the chefs and owner of the restaurant appreciate him. Ben then leaves the building and calls Jared to tell him he is done. Jared asks Ben if he will be going on a break before the next job, but Ben asks him to give him details of the next job, which shows Ben does not have any social life aside from his jobs. Jared then explains his next job is to travel to Bainbridge Island to work at Il Cibo y Vida, a restaurant that was top class until the chef who founded it passed away 3 years ago. The restaurant has not been making a profit for the past 3 years, and Richard, the major shareholder, needs Ben to bring the restaurant back into the spotlight, or he will need to sell. Ben agrees to travel down there and see what he can do. Ben confirms that everyone on board is ready for the process. Back to Richard and Elizabeth. Richard has explained to Elizabeth that someone is coming to help see if the restaurant can make a profit again. Richard has offers on the ground, but wants to try and see if the restaurant can still get back to its best before selling, which is why he is bringing in Ben. Elizabeth is not pleased with the situation, but Richard tells him it is the board's decision, and she has to comply with it. Elizabeth fears that the consultant is going to turn things upside down, and the memory of her husband at the restaurant will forever be forgotten. She believes Il Cibo y Vida is more than just a business, but a family. However, Richard explains that since the family is running a business, they need to start making a profit. This makes Elizabeth let her guard down a bit, even though she is fighting the idea in her mind. The next day, Elizabeth is with her daughter in the house. She is hoping she will be able to spend some extra time with her daughter Soph, but Soph turns her down for her friends. She feels a bit lonely and needs a companion. Ben gets to Bainbridge early, but the accommodation arranged for him will not be ready for another hour, so the hotel receptionist suggests he explore the town, as there is an artisan festival going on. Ben agrees and decides to check out the artisan festival. On the other hand, Elizabeth is with Ginny, her friend, to ask about how the market has been. Ginny is selling and appreciates Elizabeth checking up on her. Ginny asks after Soph, and Elizabeth explains that she is with her friends. Ben gets to Ginny's stand, and both Ginny and Elizabeth start advertising to Ben. Ben is feeling the vibe, but it gets to a point where Ben feels Elizabeth is doing too much. But he realizes he is wrong after tasting hazelnut fudge, and tells Ginny to pay Elizabeth some commission for the ad. Ben eventually orders a bag of hazelnuts. He starts bonding with Elizabeth by asking her if she grew up in the city. From there, Ben knows Elizabeth and himself ran through ukulele while they were younger, and the only song they both did was "What a Wonderful World." Ben also notices that the environment is friendly. He spends more time chatting with Elizabeth before they both get a notification of having a meeting in a few minutes. Ben leaves, and Ginny wants to discuss Ben with Elizabeth, but she says she is just trying to help Ginny out and nothing more, before leaving for the meeting too. Elizabeth sees Ben from afar, looking lost with his phone, trying to get to a location. Elizabeth walks up to him to assist with where he is going, which is where she finds out that he is the one Richard recommended to help with the restaurant. She tries to sell the restaurant's reputation, but Ben, not knowing, says he learned the restaurant no longer has that glory, which makes Elizabeth sad. She describes the restaurant to Ben, but leaves him on the road without telling him she is the one he is coming to meet. Ben gets to Il Cibo y Vida and sees Elizabeth. He realizes they have started on the wrong foot. Ben apologizes to her, but she is not buying the apology. There is a little back and forth between them on whether Ben is going to change everything the restaurant stands for, but he keeps assuring her that he is here to help, and not to destroy. Ben also assures her that he understands her pains, and will consider her before making any recommendations. Chef Antonio joins the conversation to intimidate Ben and support Elizabeth. Antonio had followed Marco down to Italy as his protege, and is now the head chef since Marco is deceased. Ben requests to taste their best dishes to start his assessment, and Elizabeth agrees they can make it work. Elizabeth introduces Ben to the whole team, so that they will know what he is there to do. Ben explains his job function, and Antonio prepares the team for what to do. Chef Antonio and every other team member start working on Ben's request. Later that day, Elizabeth explains each of the meals to Ben as he tastes them. Through these explanations, Ben has some reservations about the tomatoes they use, which they import from Piedmont. But Elizabeth and Antonio revolt against them, because that is one of the things that made Marco's dishes popular at first. Elizabeth asks Ben to promise her that he will not ask them to change it. He let her know he cannot make any promises, which saddens her. Antonio is not also happy with the expenditure on the tomatoes, but Elizabeth calms him down and tells Ben they will look into it. Elizabeth wants to know everything Ben is writing down, but he does not want to share, making her nervous. Ben requests to speak with her. While they are going to a private location, Nana sees Ben, speaks with him, and also tells him he will feel sorry if he changes Marco's recipe. Ben promises her he will not change it. This shocks Elizabeth, but Ben reveals that he had to make a promise because the discussion was looking scary. Elizabeth sees some light in the promise Ben has made for Nana, and asks Ben if they can start over, and he agrees. They both then agree to go for a walk. Elizabeth tries to know Ben more by asking how he ended up doing what he is doing. Ben explains how he started his journeys, and it fascinates Elizabeth. Ben then brings Il Cibo y Vida back into the discussion, saying that they will need to look for the things that made it special and focus on them. But Elizabeth is not happy with the past tense Ben is using and revolts against it. They conclude that what they need to do is make people see it and bring them back again. At the front of a fountain, Ben throws in a coin, and gives Elizabeth a coin to throw in for her wishes, but she does not want to do it. Ben convinces her, and all she wishes for is for everything to be okay before throwing in the coin. Ben then throws in more coins to support her wish. During the few moments they spend together, Elizabeth enjoys Ben's company, even though she still feels he might rip the restaurant apart. Soph has also been struggling since the demise of her dad. She notices that all her friends are only friends with her because their parents forced them to, not because they want to be with her. Elizabeth encourages her daughter and assures her she will find new friends soon. Back in the restaurant, Ben and Elizabeth are looking at the menu, and he is introducing some of the things he believes are going to help the restaurant. Ben also suggests an open-concept kitchen, but Antonio does not agree with him, as he quotes Marco's idea of an open kitchen. Elizabeth knows there is a special way to negotiate the price from Signor Petrenti, where they get olive oil, but she wants Ben to witness the process. So they set out to get the olive oil. When Elizabeth meets Signor, they exchange greetings. And Signor is surprised to see Elizabeth, since it is Antonio who usually comes to buy the olive oil. Ben also greets them, but he stands back to observe the negotiation. The process of negotiating the price with Signor is to play a game with him. The more you lose, the higher your price, but the more you win, the lower your price. Elizabeth plays the card game with Signor, and wins all the games they play together. Signor is surprised to see Elizabeth winning against him, and this gives Elizabeth the purchasing and negotiating power to reduce the price of the olive oil to less than their previous cost price. This process seems interesting to Ben as they leave with the olive oil. Ben suggests that they can also work things out with the supplier of tomatoes, which makes Elizabeth say that not everything is about overhead and profit. But Ben explains that when all is said and done, overhead and profit matter. Elizabeth understands, but does not want the thirst for profit to make them lose the relationship that has made Il Cibo y Vida great in the first place, and Ben also understands. They both enter the car. Ben reveals that he was close to getting married once, but it did not work out. Since then, it has just been work for him, and he loves what he does. Soph is still having a hard time in school. She does not know where to sit during lunch, because all her friends are not talking to her, and she ends up going to the art studio instead. Elizabeth encourages her, and keeps assuring her that she will soon find someone who will be interested in making friends with her. The next scene shows Ben at the restaurant on Monday, seeing the restaurant closed. Ben is surprised, and calls Elizabeth to understand what is going on. Elizabeth explains that the restaurant gives their staff the day off on Monday, to make up for the extra hours of work during the weekend. Ben mentions that it means giving away 15% of the potential profit, but Elizabeth feels it is what makes their staff loyal to the restaurant. Elizabeth also mentions that they have dinner together every Monday, and she invites Ben to the dinner by mistake. He agrees to come and sees it as an avenue to get to know the staff more. Elizabeth goes to Ginny's shop to get one more ingredient for the cake, based on her old recipe for nana. She wants to bake it and use it as a dessert for dinner. Ginny is surprised Elizabeth is baking twice a week, and while asking questions, she realizes that Ben will be at the dinner. She concludes that her friend is baking because Ben will be coming for dinner. Ginny explains to Elizabeth that no one will judge her if she starts dating again, but Elizabeth does not want to talk about it because she is more worried about Marco's legacy. Ginny's words about Elizabeth living her own life and not Marco's life get to her, as she is almost becoming teary while explaining she wants a life where she is not bothered about the future or thinking about the past. But Ginny thinks that will be difficult to do when she is still wearing her wedding ring. While Elizabeth is going home, she sees Ben on the road. He is coming from the store where he got wine for dinner. While talking, the two of them see that they should create time for themselves, since they are mostly both worried about work. They then agree to keep phones away and have a discussion without work. Elizabeth laughs, but while they are waiting to start a conversation outside work, someone plays the ukulele by their side, and Ben suggests that they can play music at the restaurant. Elizabeth affirms Ben cannot do without work, but while listening to the ukulele, she hears that it is what a wonderful world the person is playing, which touches Elizabeth. She acts as if Ben set it up, but he replies that he did not. Elizabeth goes and get the dinner ready, but what she is in truth running from is for Ben to see her emotional self. They bid one another goodbye as they leave in different directions. However, while they are steps apart, they both look back as their eyes meet one another, before continuing to their different destinations. The next scene shows Elizabeth baking the cake for the dinner dessert, with joy and a smile on her face. Ben gets to her house, and while he is at the door, Elizabeth is checking herself in the mirror. Elizabeth has put on some slight makeup, and adorns herself to make herself more beautiful. Ben is amazed by what he sees. She invites him and his other members of the restaurant greet Ben. Elizabeth introduces Soph to Ben, and Ben easily connects with her. He also suggests some of Soph's drawings should be used for the restaurant, which Elizabeth sees as a great idea, as she did not think about it before. Antonio is in the kitchen, and he gives Ben a sample of it to taste. He enjoys it. He wonders why it is not on El Cibo y Vita's menu, but Antonio says it is his own twist. Ben also suggests that Antonio try out a chef competition he hears is going on, but Antonio believes it is not a good idea. Nana, seeing Ben disturbing Antonio and bringing the business up, calls him to stir what is on the fire, which he is obliged to do, not knowing she is only playing with him. Everyone laughs at the joke about Nana. The table is set, and they all start talking. Everyone forces Elizabeth to share one of her ridiculous memories from when she was trying to impress Nana. The story excites everyone, and Ben keeps stealing glances at her. After eating, Elizabeth goes on to share the dessert. Ben compliments Nana on the cake, thinking she did it because the dessert is fabulous, but after his compliments, he realizes it was baked by Elizabeth. Nana tastes the cake and sees how good it is. She also knows Elizabeth tweaks her recipe to make it, which makes her say that sometimes change makes things better. This seems to be directed at Elizabeth and Antonio. Everyone appreciates Elizabeth for making time to make the cake. Still, Ben keeps gazing at Elizabeth while everyone continues eating. Ben enjoys his time and calls it the best business dinner he has ever had. Even though he wishes to stay, he bids Elizabeth goodbye. Elizabeth, on the other hand, is also hoping Ben can instigate something more between them, as her heart races, but she also bids him goodnight. The next day, Elizabeth sees Richard in the restaurant, and while they start talking, Richard tells her the bad news about the restaurant being up for sale for the next 3 weeks, if there is no turnaround. Richard is losing hope in El Cibo y Vida, and is ready to sell when the offer is still on the table. This breaks Elizabeth's heart, as she cannot also get enough to pay off Richard's shares while she fights for the restaurant. Also, this is the only thing she has of Marco, and she does not know what to tell the staff and her daughter. Jared also calls Ben to explain the situation at the restaurant to him, which means Ben's contract is terminated. This pains Ben, as he was not able to achieve his goals with El Cibo y Vida, and he is also worried about Elizabeth. Getting to the restaurant, Ben speaks to Elizabeth about the way forward, and Elizabeth is wondering if Ben will stay behind since his contract has been terminated. Ben promises not to leave her until his job is done. This brings her some joy. Ben moves to the kitchen to see Antonio, and notices he is trying out some new recipes. He tastes the recipes and loves them, and suggests Antonio sells some of his recipes in the restaurant. But Antonio refuses, because he thinks he best remembers Marco's legacy with them. Ben explains that Antonio's recipe is also Marco's recipe, because he taught him all he knows, which convinces Antonio. However, Antonio fears that Elizabeth might not approve, but Ben promises to take care of it. Ben calls Elizabeth for a walk to talk about Antonio putting his recipe on the menu. Elizabeth agrees, but she is not sure if she is ready for the step. After a little convincing from Ben, she agrees to give Antonio her blessings. Elizabeth also talks about how the bank will only give her the loan if there is a major buzz in the restaurant before the 3 weeks, which Elizabeth sees as impossible. Ben believes it is hard, but it is not impossible. While Elizabeth is making herself up for work, she decides to embrace the change by taking the first step, which is to drop her wedding ring and move on. Elizabeth and Ben get to Il Cibo y Vida, and they meet Nana. Nana insists on greeting Ben with a double cheek kiss, saying he is family. While Ben and Elizabeth are talking and going to tell Antonio about the new changes, Nana hears and supports them, which brings relief to Elizabeth. Nana, on the other hand, has been expecting the change, but did not mention it. Antonio says no again, but agrees when Ben explains that Marco's best dishes will still be on the menu. But Antonio will take care of the rest of the menu, and he is sure that Elizabeth will give her blessing. What worries Elizabeth then is how to generate a buzz within 3 weeks, but Ben believes it can be generated if Antonio enters the Battle of Bainbridge and wins. Antonio is afraid, and says he is not ready. But after Ben and Elizabeth convince him, he agrees to join the competition. Antonio then sets the table for some of his recipes for Ben, Elizabeth, and Ginny. Ben loves it, and suggests it should be part of Antonio's recipe. The problem is that he cannot make it because he is out of truffle, the main ingredient, and since it is not the season, they will not find it in the market. The only way they can find it is if they hunt for it, and Ben agrees, so they go on a hunt with Elizabeth. Ginny is not able to follow them, because she has an engagement. While looking for truffles, Elizabeth and Ben get time to talk. Ben appreciates Elizabeth for being open to change, and Elizabeth thanks him for being someone she can rely on. While they are gazing into one another's eyes, and a bit of love tension is building up, Antonio shouts in excitement to see a truffle. While making preparations for the competition, Ben and Soph talk about her drawing. Elizabeth loves that Ben is good with Soph, and it will not be a problem if she ends up dating him. While making preparations, Antonio, Ben, and Elizabeth realize their pastry chef will not be around, and while Elizabeth is thinking of looking for a pastry chef, Ben and Antonio talk her into being the substitute. Elizabeth is scared because she is not sure she is good enough, but they convince her she is. After this, there is a little mother and child moment between Elizabeth and Soph, where they both appreciate one another for how they have been able to stay strong, connect with new friends, and accept the new changes happening with Il Cibo y Vida. The next scene shows the chef competition proper. Antonio and Elizabeth are nervous, but they both believe they have all it takes to win the competition. The competition starts, and both Antonio and Elizabeth get to work. While it is going on, the gas cooker Antonio and Elizabeth are using to cook stops working, and this makes them panic. Ben steps in by asking one of their opponents for assistance, and they eventually complete their recipes. At the end of the competition, while waiting for the results, Antonio and Elizabeth share some of the food they made with people so that they can taste it. Eventually the judges come up with the result, but Antonio and Elizabeth lose to Chef Hill and pastry chef Levitz. Antonio and Elizabeth believe they did well, and are disappointed they are not the winners of the competition. Each of them starts blaming themselves, till one of the judges comes around to compliment them for their wonderful food, saying she voted for them. Elizabeth, Ben, Antonio, Nana, and Soph feel sad and go back to the restaurant like losers. On getting to the restaurant, Ben sees the buzzing topic on Il Cibo y Vida online, and confirms that he is not the only one seeing it. Someone posts about the restaurant being back to its best, and this makes people request to be at the restaurant the next day. Ben then explains how they should organize things to get prepared for the buzz. Elizabeth is flushed by the news, and does not know how to react until Ben tells her she will be making the desserts. Soph also encourages her mom. Ben does not think Elizabeth needs him anymore, but Elizabeth quickly tells him that she needs him around. They start preparing for the night based on Ben's description, and they have a house full of people. Elizabeth is excited, because it has been a while since she saw that many people in the restaurant. Ben congratulates her for the success, and is glad everyone can feel what he feels when he first entered Il Cibo y Vida, which is family. The consultant from the bank is also present, and Elizabeth goes to her to see if the current buzz can get them the loan. The loan consultant asks her a question about being able to manage things now if Ben is not around. Elizabeth explains that Ben has pushed her to see the right path, and assures her that the restaurant can do well without him. Ben hears this and feels what Elizabeth means, that she does not need him anymore. He then decides to leave. Nana sees him and tries to convince him to stay, but he insists on leaving. Later that night, Elizabeth looks around for Ben, only to realize he left earlier to travel back to where he came from. Elizabeth and Ginny get talking about him, and it is obvious that Elizabeth is in love. But she thinks Ben left because he doesn't love her in the same way. Nana comes in to explain to Elizabeth that Ben does not want to go, and tells her that a little conviction from her can make him stay. Elizabeth then heads out to search for Ben. Getting to where Ben is staying, Elizabeth realizes that he is not there. She also goes to the park, and it seems as if Ben is gone before she gets there. This breaks her heart, and she sits on a bench. The same ukulele lady that sang before asks Elizabeth if she has any requests, and while she is thinking about it, Ben says, "What a wonderful world." Elizabeth feels joy in hearing Ben's voice. He explains that he thought he could leave after doing his job, but he cannot, because of her. He then explains that the reason his engagement did not work is because he lost his fiancée. Since then, it has always been his job, but now he is feeling something he has not felt in a long time. They both exchange loving advice on making a change for one another, before Elizabeth asks how he feels. Ben walks up to her and kisses her passionately. Back in the restaurant, all the Il Cibo y Vida family are having dinner with Ben. Elizabeth raises a glass of wine to appreciate every one of them for being a family and supporting the restaurant. Na na cheers to Il Cibo y Vida, and the movie ends.